Sam, I want to change gears here on you a little bit away from football. So it's just been sort of reported that Ben McCollum is going to take the job over at Iowa. And I
Yeah.
just wonder, looking through the lens of Nebraska basketball and where they're at, what does Ben McCollum moving into your backyard do to your expectations or kind of your hopes for Nebraska basketball moving forward?
Well, I've talked to John Walker a little bit because John obviously covered Ben at Northwest Missouri State for like 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've also watched just the way that they play. So here's what Iowa did. They went out and hired a guy that will not use I don't have enough NIL as an excuse.
Yeah.
They went out and hired a guy who will try to control the game through X's and O's. They went out and hired a guy whose team got pretty well beat by Texas Tech. I will say that too. So like that game wasn't. They beat Missouri, but they didn't come that close to beating Texas Tech. And so like it depends on what Iowa wants. If Iowa wants a guy that's going to come out and drake it up, they can make the NCAA tournament every year. I don't know that they're getting a guy that's going to like get them to the second weekend with the current approach. But that's Iowa. Nebraska would love that. And so what's interesting is that Nebraska is going to watch this guy go to Iowa, and this guy fits a lot of the components that I think Nebraskans would want in a coach. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Because I think there's still a lot of respect and support for Fred Hoiberg, no question. But like McCollum's going to do it a little bit different way. Now that was kind of Tim Miles too, and it didn't work out. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting because I could see Nebraska having a lot of success against Iowa with McCollum there because he's not able to get elite players because their NIL won't support it. The other thing is you have to want to go play in a league on a team that's going to slow its pace down almost purposefully. And not everybody wants to do that. Whereas at Nebraska, if Fred's got the right NIL money, he's able to say, you can come here and play at an NBA pace once we get things going. And that's attractive. So like this comes down to a talent thing. And I know there's there's been a lot of whatever about, does Nebraska have enough money to go out and compete? And I get all that. I feel like that's an interesting shift in the conversation. Like now it's going to be Nebraska's fans' fault that they don't like. I don't know. I don't want that to. I hope it doesn't shift to that, and it feels like it's going to shift to, well, the NIL offerings they're not raising enough money among the boosters
Sam,
who've been
I'm
going.
with you. That shouldn't be. I'm with you. I don't. I hope it doesn't shift there either. And believe me, if anybody's tried to do their best, it's me. Like I don't think that's the issue. I don't.
No, I agree with you. I just like Nebraska's fans have been remarkably loyal to that program. And anytime you say the words NIL, you're not talking about revenue sharing. Revenue sharing's over here. We'll see what NIL looks like after April 7th. But up until July 1st, you can offer NIL money, and then it's supposed to shift over once the House settlement's approved. When you say NIL, you're talking about wealthy fans giving Nebraska basketball money to get players. And, that's interesting to me. Like that now let's shift to that and let's say, well, the real issue here is not having enough NIL funds to go get the players that you need. And that's very close to saying the fans aren't being supportive enough. And I'm not sure. I think Nebraska fans have been extremely supportive of the basketball program, given its relative success over the many years. So and Fred's not the one pushing that narrative, by the way. Fred's not saying any of that. I don't think he would ever do that. I don't think he would ever use that as a reason. He doesn't like talking about NIL. He's not one of these coaches that's like, well, boy, the things really changed. He doesn't do that. And I appreciate and I respect that he doesn't do that. He doesn't make it all about that. I'm just saying that's becoming some of the story. The reality is Iowa just hired a coach who's going to say, I don't need the NIL money. You can give me it and I'll go get a better player, but I'm going to win without it. That's interesting to me. Like, that's super interesting. Iowa's got their center visiting Creighton, according to Joe Tipton. Owen Freeman is going to visit Creighton. And I suspect Creighton will have more money than a lot of schools will because they don't have to share it with football teams. But, Creighton's gonna go in the portal and do what it needs to be done. Like that's a blue blood program at this point. Like that's an elite program. Nebraska's not quite at that level, even though they've beaten Creighton 2 of the last 3 years. And I'll be curious to see what Nebraska is able to do over the next month, and what the narrative. Not Fred, he doesn't push this, but what the general thought process is about whether Nebraska can be successful. Feels like it's shifted from, hey, they got to play better, to well, they just didn't have good enough players because they didn't have enough NIL money, and that's an interesting shift.
Sam, when we're talking about NIL and fan support, though, we're talking about like two different types of fans for the most part, right? Like most fans of a program aren't the ones giving major NIL dollars, and most people giving major NIL dollars don't make up a huge, like when PBA is sold out or close to sold out every game, like only a small fraction of those people are actually funding most of the NIL operations, right? Like, so I feel like sometimes we kind of conflate those two things, and that's not necessarily the case. Like, I feel like you've got the everyday fans, and then you've got like the booster fans.
Yeah, I think Nebraska basketball has good boosters too. Like, I think they have a gorgeous training complex, and that was, a booster stood behind that. Like that, I think they've broadly been pretty since PBA opened and since Hendricks opened. I think they've been fairly well supported. But again, then we're shifting. What we're doing is we're shifting the onus of success onto wealthy people who I'm not in the business of telling people how to spend their money.
Yeah.
Like that's and I think it's who's often said that, I think, is Sipple. He was I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money, and related to like coaching salaries or whatever it was. And I think the same thing. Like, it's hard for me to tell a booster or like say, well, they just need to give this money. People who have that money have the right to give it to the football building or the volleyball program or the women's basketball program. They can give it to who. Now, you know what? Mark Manning just went and finished second at the NCAA tournament. Maybe a booster's like, I'm inspired by that, and I'm gonna fund some money over there. Like, people should. I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money. Now again, it is a reality that if you're in the bottom half of NIL in the Big Ten, you're probably not going to get as good of players. But as we both know, Nebraska and Indiana both missed the NCAA tournament, and one of them had a whole bunch of money and one of them didn't. And Nebraska beat Indiana on the court. So, like, it's more than just NIL, I think. And Nebraska was close to making the NCAA tournament. So, and they didn't lose down the stretch. The games that cost them the NCAA tournament were losses to Iowa and Minnesota, and neither one of those teams had as much NIL money as Nebraska. I think. I'm not sure. So, like, the start of the Nebraska-Minnesota game wasn't about NIL. So I think there's just a conversation to be had about how quickly that shifted. I get it. It's the portal era, so you are going to have to go out and get players, but I just want to be mindful of Ben McCollum is why you asked that question. And the thing about him is I think Iowa went and hired a coach that's not going to demand a $5 million NIL fund. He's going to be like, give me what you want, but I'm going to go win anyway. Now, whether he does or not, I don't know, but his mindset is he's going to win without it.